I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. In this conversation, Marissa Weiler joins me to explore the complexities of Jewish identity in the field of applied behavior analysis. Marissa shares personal stories of heritage, acceptance, and the significance of community within the Jewish behavior analysis field. Marissa also opens up about her personal experiences with ADHD, emphasizing the unique ways it can manifest in women. She highlights her advocacy for creating a supportive community for Jewish clinicians through the newly established Jewish Organization for Behavior Analysis. The discussion also highlights the need for cultural competence in behavior analysis and the role of behavior analysts in addressing social issues. Welcome, Marissa.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I'm producing this podcast in the territories of the Klamath, Klehus, Homoko, and Comox First Nations. As always, I'm grateful to be here. So, Marissa, tell me a little about yourself.
Well, I am a BCBA. I live in Texas. I have been in this field since about 2016, and I made a career change from marketing and public relations, and knew I needed to do something more impactful for me. And I found out about ABA through looking to make this career change and doing a lot of volunteer work with the Special Olympics, Autism Speaks, the Autism Society, which I'd been doing all growing up too. And I thought that the only position that would be for me would be as a special education teacher, and I didn't want to be a teacher. So later down the line, in making that career change, I found ABA, learned, did some research on it, and thankfully with all that volunteer experience, I was able to get hired on, go through some pretty extensive training, and get into the field. And as soon as I started in there, I knew, okay, this is exactly where I need to be. This is where I want to be. This is a fascinating field, fascinating science, and I just completely submerged myself into it. And the rest is history. I, went back to school, got my master's in applied behavior analysis, and yeah, I've been a BCBA for 4 years now. Currently in school for my PhD, and just doing there.
Yeah. So, what made you do all this volunteering?
Yeah, so I actually, there's a couple of things. So I grew up competing in pageants, and not the toddlers and tiaras and crazy moms or anything. I loved doing it. My mom, asked me all the time, made sure I was comfortable. And when I didn't win, it was very much along the lines of, how do you feel? Do you want to do it again? What do we need to work on so you can do better next time? Anyway. But with that, the way pageants, used to be, and the ones I grew up doing, really put an emphasis on serving your community and getting out there, doing community service, having platforms, so issues that were important to you, and being able to speak on that, either while you're competing or if you're a title holder. And so with pageantry, I kind of learned to really enjoy serving the community and doing community service. A lot of events with the Special Olympics. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. So there were quite a few events happening with the Special Olympics that they needed volunteers for. So through pageants, I did a lot of volunteer work with that. And I genuinely enjoyed it. I loved it. I had a great time. I loved everything that the organization stood for. I loved watching the athletes compete, and just how much it's celebrated for not only their abilities, but the participation of it all, and that it's very inclusive. And that's something that I wanted to be a part of. And so, outside of pageantry too, like I didn't need to have a crown on my head to go do that volunteer work. And I wanted to do it, when I had the opportunity to, so that's one part of it. Another part of it is growing up, going to a Chicago public school until we moved to the suburbs. It's, big classrooms, lots of kids, probably too much for one teacher to handle. But the kindergarten class I was in was very inclusive. And so some of the special needs students spent a lot of time in our general education classroom. And I happened to sit near a lot of those kids. And, I think it's as a 5-year-old who's still learning about other types of people in the world, it's not uncommon to see some of your classmates kind of be like, they're different and that scares me, or they're doing this, they're doing that. I'm not familiar with it. It's startling to me. It's off-putting maybe. But I was like the opposite. I was like, wow, like she's in a wheelchair. I wonder why. I want to ask questions. I want to know more. I want to sit next to her. And they had an aide. I'm thinking of a student in particular. And
Mm.
so I was like, oh, she can't talk. Why can't she talk? And the aide was super nice and, educated me. And I wanted to be her partner for things. I wanted to be around her because while different is scary for some people, different was always intriguing for me. And so I always would think back to that, as I got older and was doing a lot of that volunteer work of how, I want to foster an inclusive environment around myself wherever I go. So that was also part of wanting to participate in a lot of events for special needs individuals.
Are you still connected to Special O?
Not as much as I used to be, just because now that I'm a BCBA, I barely have the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But I will say, when I first moved to Texas, the company that I was working for as a registered behavior technician was very involved with the Special Olympics. So, kind of through work, I was able to participate a lot in a lot of our outside of work events with the Special Olympics. And the company even had their own Special Olympics soccer team and it was open to not just our clients in our clinic, but, anyone who wanted to in the community. So I love getting to participate in that every year. Um, while I no longer work for that company, I still always speak highly of them and refer kiddos and clients in the community to go participate in those activities. So hopefully I can get involved again, but when I can clear my schedule.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We'll go forward in your career in a second. I wanted to go back to pageantry for a second. I was curious if I realize this isn't where you connected. You did connect kind of in the volunteering. I was curious if you ever had any experience or sort of knew of sort of neurodivergent folks kind of participating in pageants. Is that a thing? Have you seen that before?
Have actually.
Do you have a credential with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or would like a certificate of attendance for another organization? You can earn continuing education units by going to www.behaviorspeak.com, clicking on CEUs, and entering the 3 secret words. The first secret word is dialogue.
Are you a professional, a student, or an enthusiast of applied behavior analysis? Then mark your calendar for August 27, 28, and 2025. Join us in Oaxaca, Mexico for the second biennial Congress of the Mexican Organization of Practitioners of Applied Behavior Analysis, OMPAC. Building a better life and greater well-being through applied behavior analysis. On Wednesday, August 20th, we'll kick off with a full day of specialized workshops led by international leaders including Dr. William Heward, Dr. Greg Hanley, Troy Fry, Miguel Avila, Dr. Lee Mason, Dr. Rocio Rosales, Alonso Andrews, and Dr. Janet Sanchez Enriquez. On August 28th and 29th, we'll host a single-track conference featuring keynote presentations by the most respected voices in the field: Dr. Timothy Vollmer, Dr. Neil Martin, Dr. Patrick Fryman, Troy Fry, Miguel Avila, Dr. Janet Twyman, Dr. Robert Ross, Dr. Jonathan Ferdinand, Dr. Robert Pennington, Dr. Fernando Armendariz, Dr. Silvia Morales Chainé, Dr. Juan José Sánchez Sosa, Brandon Franklin, Dr. Alejandro León, Dr. Varsovia Hernández Eslava, Dr. Violeta Félix, Dr. Edgar Landa, Dr. Everardo Aguilar, and Mariana de los Santos. We will offer simultaneous English to Spanish and Spanish to English interpretation to ensure accessibility and participation for a truly international audience. Plus, CEUs are included with registration. You'll have opportunities to network and to collaborate with colleagues from across Latin America and beyond. Get all the details now and register at www.ompac.mx. That's www.ompac, oaxaca.mx. We look forward to seeing you in Oaxaca as we continue strengthening the presence and the impact of applied behavior analysis in Latin America.
Not so much early on in my pageantry, or we didn't have like TikTok and social media then, so it wasn't maybe as like talked about or advertised unless you maybe knew somebody who was open about a diagnosis. But as I got older and there's social media and you're able to connect more with other girls that you compete with and women that you compete with from across the country.
Yeah.
I got to, know a lot of other girls, and I became friends via social media and like mutual friends with a girl who is a huge autism advocate because she's diagnosed herself and competes in pageants and
Neat.
has done really well. And so that's my long answer to that question is
Yeah,
yes.
no, for sure.
And I think it's especially now that there's so much awareness and acceptance, and again, social media, that we're learning more about neurodivergent individuals who are, in that arena and other competitive arenas.
Yeah, right on, right on. You also have a big interest in ADHD. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 27. You know, until up until then, I, like most people, understood ADHD to be the stereotypical someone who's hyper, someone who's talking a lot, someone who has a lot of energy, mostly in boys. And I didn't know that it can present itself different in women and in girls, and that, hyperactive doesn't just mean like physically hyperactive, it also can mean mentally hyperactive.
Yeah.
And so I struggled so much academically and socially growing up, and even, as I got older, and, went to see a doctor and was diagnosed with, social anxiety and depression. And, um, I continued on, and I honestly don't remember how I learned about this. Maybe it was through talking to friends, or maybe even something I saw on social media, but it was something about like focus. And, I enjoy reading, but it's something I didn't do previously a lot besides like Harry Potter. That was the only thing that was like my end all be all. But,
Sure.
outside of that, if I wasn't interested, it was really hard for me to read because I would read through a page, I'd get to the bottom and I'd realize I didn't comprehend anything I just read. Like I read each word, but my brain started to drift off into like what I had for breakfast, what I'm going to do tomorrow,
Yep.
like all these things. And I would have to go back and start again, and it would happen again. And I would have to like read a page 3 times. And I was looking at something somewhere that, showed that as like a pretty typical symptom of ADHD. And I was like, and also something that kind of clicked was like, this doesn't happen for everybody.
Yeah.
Like everybody doesn't have this issue
Right.
when they read. I just thought that like I was not strong enough to overcome this obstacle, and everybody else was. And another, like a list of like other symptoms where I was like, oh, so I'm not stupid, and also this isn't like normal for everyone. And so, went to the doctor to like kind of talk about that. And, after an evaluation, it was like, oh yeah, definitely ADHD. And it was such an aha moment. It's like I went back into a time machine and went back to every single moment in middle school and high school.
Yep.
And it like made sense, like where my struggles were academically, socially.
Yep.
So at first it's like a relief, and then it's frustration because it's like, man, if only this diagnosis had happened like so far back. Like I feel like things would have been so different for me. I would have had more awareness and would have known how to, ask for appropriate supports and accommodations. And had I had those supports and accommodations, like I would have, succeeded or excelled in different areas where I struggled so hard. And again, that kind of leads me to what we were discussing before about, implicit bias with, different behaviors.
Yep.
And, ADHD and ASD present very differently in girls and women. So it's often misdiagnosed for emotional disorders like anxiety or depression. It also presents differently. And like the very stereotypical that we know now as like presentations of, ASD or ADHD in women, like it's as if it's like textbook of like me. And so I'm like, okay, I'm glad there's more awareness of this. But also being a biracial female, so my dad's white, my mom's black. There was also my frustration lies with all of the teachers I ever had growing up who I had classmates that when they were struggling, there was like a reach out of like, let me see what you're struggling with. Let me help you. Let's get in contact with your parents and figure this out together. And then they get supports and accommodations. Whereas the kind of treatment and response that I received from every teacher I've ever had has been, you're not trying enough.
Right.
You're lazy. You're not asking questions. Why don't you get help? You're just not going to pass, kind of just like, whatever, like you'll fall through the cracks, which I did. Obviously, I was able to pass my classes and things like that. But it's like, I knew I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask for help. Because if you don't know exactly what you're doing in something and you're like, I need help, and they say, with what? Like, how brave are you as a high schooler who's struggling to just say, well, all of it.
Yeah.
And like, let's start with, I need help focusing because I can't.
Yeah.
So, that's why that's something that's very important to me, something that I want to do more research on, bring awareness to, and very specifically young Black or, young students of color who are also girls. It's like, check all these boxes of things that are just written off because of your demographic and it doesn't fit like a stereotype. So,
Yeah.
wanting to spread more awareness of that. If there's ultimately, I would love for there to be assessments for either ASD or ADHD that have questions and different evaluations that are specific to those girls that present ASD or ADHD in that
Yep.
way versus the stereotypical and historical, like this, and typically boys.
Yeah. I mean, like, just culturally responsive assessment altogether is really not a thing. I had a guest on Ziffy, and I'm going to pronounce her, I'm not going to butcher her name, Nokolo, on. She's Nigeria, and she's doing her doctoral work on culturally responsive autism assessments for Nigerian folks, because it's a whole different way of kind of looking at the childhood, and things can get missed and get passed, and so you really have to have a different lens. So it's interesting. So basically, because I'm also have ADHD, and I think when I was a kid, I think the screenings for ADHD were quite a bit different, and I think that's why I kind of missed the boat. But you're quite a bit younger than me, and so you would think, when you were a kid, you shouldn't have missed that. But because you're biracial, because you're Black, you were likely skipped, and just it was just assumed that you're just a problem child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you're doing your PhD now. Where are you going to school?
National University, which is where I also got my master's.
Nice.
And I wanted to kind of go back to what you had when you were talking about, the cultural responsiveness and
Yeah.
assessments. That's actually something that really, kind of sparked my interest in getting a PhD in the first
Okay. Yeah.
place.
Cool.
As a BCBA, it was, I think, maybe my first year as a BCBA, I had, a client's parent fill out an assessment because I had their, authorization coming up. And she had let me know at a meeting that when she completed that assessment, and for background, she is Black and her daughter is Black. She let me know that she left a comment on the assessment because it lets you leave comments, which I didn't even know, because she had asked if I read it. And I was honest with her. I was like, honestly, I didn't even know that it let you do that, but I'll go back and look at it. And she's like, I can tell you about it. I was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And so one of the some of the questions were in regards to like personal hygiene as far as like hair care. And hair care in the Black community, like with ethnic hair, is very, very different. Like my hair's straightened right now, but like I have very like curly hair. And, a lot of like most of the questions, if not all of them, were very, not inclusive for that. Right. So some of the questions seemed as if you answered them a certain way, for a lack of a better explanation, it was either like more autistic or less autistic. Right. Or, not more autistic or less autistic, more severe or less severe. Whereas really it's neither. It's just that this wouldn't be how to properly care for ethnic hair. And so she had mentioned that, and yes, and I was like, just like lit a fire in me after she said that. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, like this does not account for that. And it kind of sent me on this, not spiral, but like thinking about like what else? Like, there's questions like, can this small child use a fork when they eat. Are they using a fork often? But there's plenty of cultures where they don't use forks.
Yep.
That's not typical, or they don't use forks for most things. So
Yep.
it's like, whether they can or not isn't necessarily the question, or,
Wow.
how often they are, because like that's not relevant to what we're evaluating for.
Yeah.
And it's not inclusive of, how they do things in that culture. So that was something that really sparked my interest in, wanting to do more research in that area.
Right on. And so what are you thinking your focus is going to be in the PhD?
So it's in general psychology. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to gain more knowledge on like broader, psychological concepts. I feel like since my master's is in applied behavior analysis, it's been a very narrow scope of what I've studied and what I'm working in. And there's so much more that I'm interested in psychology. And I think that having more knowledge in that area is going to help me as a clinician, as a BCBA. And I've primarily worked with, as a BCBA, I've worked with kiddos specifically with an autism diagnosis. However, previous companies I've worked for as an RBT, I've worked for companies that work with kiddos with other diagnoses, not just autism. I've like ADHD, PDD, NOS, ODD, and I want to know more about, those different diagnoses. And I want to be able to look at, even if I continue working with kids or individuals with autism, I want to be able to look at, their deficits and strengths from a broader lens besides just like what we have in applied behavior analysis.
Yeah, right on. Cool. Curious, you come from that kind of marketing PR background. Do you find that education helps you in this role, in this job?
Now that I think about it, yes. I make the joke often, like that it was a very expensive piece of paper that I don't even use now, but that's not necessarily true. It's helpful in the way that I, can represent, this field, that I can represent, myself as a clinician, that I can represent myself or represent like a company that I'm working for. Also with, this organization that I've started, obviously it comes in handy there too. To kind of be able to know how to navigate some of those things, as far as like marketing and public relations. And with a minor in communication too,
Yeah.
obviously we're doing a lot of communicating and advocating for our clients and advocating for applied behavior analysis. So I think it pretty helpful. And I'm actually happy that I've found a way to use it in a way that I'm actually passionate about, that I feel like I'm making an impact, versus like just kind of a college to corporate America. That's it.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't for me. It was soul crushing and I was terrible at it.
A lot of people say ABA really has a marketing and PR problem and always has, and that's a big reason why we're beyond sort of some of the obvious really bad history and some of the current practices too. We've never done a really good job of sort of selling ourselves to the world. We've done a great job of selling ourselves to each other.
Exactly. And I think, you bring up a great point. Like it's hard to because we're so sometimes rigid with making sure that we are objective and analytic. And so, when we're describing various concepts or the field as a whole to people who are unfamiliar, or maybe people who have, like a fed opinion of what ABA is that may or may not be accurate. We often, as a field, don't make that better by kind of just throwing terms and concepts and our own experiences and opinions at it. And so I think that that's where PR and marketing is helpful, because especially, I'm thinking specifically with how I interact with families when I have like caregiver guidance meetings and things of that nature. PR, marketing communications, has helped me identify my audience and identify how to communicate my message to that audience in a way that they're going to be able to digest it, receive it, understand it, in an appropriate way too. Like I never want to make anyone outside of the field or any families feel like I'm talking down to them or like I know more than you, because that's not true. We're all on the same team. And so obviously there's jargon in like ABA jargon and analytical terms and things like that. And so how unfair of me to just throw that at you and expect you to know what I'm talking about. And it should be the same when we're describing our field to someone who's not in our field or someone who's not familiar with ABA, or how beneficial it is, or what the goal is and what ABA is today. So I agree with you in that. I think our we need like a PR consultant for our field as a
Yeah,
whole.
yeah. I mean, and it may be too late now. I think people are going to put it together that we. It reminds me of sort of the 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 politician who got caught doing something really, really bad, and then finally hires a marketing guy, and we're like, well, it's too late. We already know what you did.
Right. You can spin it however you want, but
Yeah,
the
yeah,
damage is done.
yeah. I think this is going to be a long-term project for somebody. So you mentioned starting a new organization. So tell me about that. What's the name of the organization, and why'd you start it?
Absolutely. So, um, excuse me. It is called the Jewish Organization for Behavior Analysis. And I started it because a couple of things. One, as I'm looking at different special interest groups in the field and different organizations and associations and things, I saw that there's a plethora of different, like kind of niche groups. I think that's really cool. I think that's really, obviously within our field, we all have in common that we implement ABA therapy, or, we are BCBAs, RBTs, whatever credential, and we work with individuals with special needs. But it's even more, exciting and intriguing to find people within that field who have even more, different things in common with you, whether that be, interests or ethnic backgrounds or cultures, traditions, or, special interests. And so with that, I saw so many different ones based on, uh, ethnicities and traditions and nationalities and religions, and I never felt like those were exclusive, like I couldn't join one because I didn't fit maybe a specific demographic, but I just thought it was cool. But as I'm looking through all these, I see something for everybody, but what I didn't see was one for Jewish clinicians. And I found myself trying to find, like, search through the end of the internet to find it, and but could still be out there.
Yep.
If you're out there, you are hidden and I can't find you. And I tried my best.
Yep.
And so I wanted there to be that. And so after spending so much time trying to find it, I was like, well, maybe it's just because no one has started it yet.
Yep.
So maybe I'll do that. Which was a very scary thought at first. I'm like, wow, everyone's going to think that this is super lame and no one's going to want to be a part of it or anything. And this, I will say, this is before October 7th. So, I said, well, I want there to be something. So I'll make a Facebook group, and I won't advertise it or anything yet. We'll see who naturally comes across it and see where that goes. So I did that, invited some people that I knew who might be interested, but didn't do a ton with it because I just started a new job at that time as well. And so I was really focusing on that. So then October 7th happened. And I just felt this huge impulse to find my community within this field. And so, shortly after that day, I went back to that Facebook group that I had made. And I think it was a year prior that I had made it. And I kind of hit the ground running, and I was like, I want to share this. I want to make sure that, other Jewish clinicians don't feel alone in this field.
Yeah.
Like, while we have, ABA in common, we also have the need for Jewish community in common, and how important that is in, Judaism or Jewish culture. And, I felt alone, and I don't want to, and I don't want anyone else to either. And so I took a chance of, sharing it. And especially with October 7th and everything that is shared in social media, especially a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of, anti-Israel and just a lot of negative content, I feared, of course, that I would be met with a lot of negativity, and I wasn't, which I was grateful for. And
Nice.
what I was met with were the exact type of people that I wanted to be a part of this. People who were passionate about ABA, passionate about our field, being a clinician, and very proud of being Jewish, proud of celebrating Jewish culture and wanting to combat anti-Semitism in, the face of October 7th and everything that's happened after, and wanting to just exist as a Jewish clinician without having to, defend, their Judaism or um, defend their abilities as a clinician. So that's how this came to be.
Yeah. So you said you were fearing negativity. Were you fearing negativity from outside of the Jewish community?
From outside of the Jewish community, because, it, I was shocked to see so many people, both individuals I knew and individuals I didn't know, feel so confident in sharing very hateful content and opinions and like media. Whereas, from where I stood when this first happened, before I even went to social media, it was like, this is a terrible thing that has happened. Surely everyone else feels that way too. And I think that most people or everyone else does feel that way, but in a very different lens. And then add on there like hate towards a specific side, right? Like we can all agree that war is not good. But when you add a layer of masses of people who are like, this war is bad, and it's this side's fault, and this group's of people's fault. And if you feel this way, you're also at fault and you're bad. And
Gotcha.
we must be aggressive towards you and be negative towards you. And we will do this anywhere and everywhere. So, seeing that hate on social media, I felt that I was putting myself in a vulnerable position, especially since I'm sharing this under my personal name.
Yeah.
And so having that come back to not only, me trying to start this organization, but back to me, and getting, negativity or even, as far as harassment, which is pretty extreme, but it's happening from people outside of the Jewish community or people who maybe have a different understanding of Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general.
I want to come back to that in a second. Pre-October 7, how many folks do you have in the group?
Maybe between like 10 and 20.
Yeah, so not too many. And how many do you have now?
There's, I think.
Okay, yeah. And that's still not a lot. So are there any demographic stats on sort of Jewish behavior analysts with the BACB or anything like that?
I don't think so. I don't know for sure, but I've never seen them, and so I would have to probably like do specific like, search for that.
Yeah.
But I will say, so we have been having, monthly meetings, and so kind of relative to that question, in our meeting yet last night, one of the members kind of brought up that, DEI is a very big thing right now. And, inclusivity, cultural competence, like we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
And in a lot of, discussions and presentations of that nature, you don't really see the Jewish community as a part of that or like described in or demonstrated in these, visuals and things like that.
Gotcha.
So what we were saying is that with this rise in anti-Semitism and, in turn, the rise in combating anti-Semitism, we feel that, the demographic of Jewish Americans and now Jewish clinicians or Israeli clinicians, we feel that it would be appropriate to start to see more of that in these demographics and in these statistics because it's so prevalent now.
Even offhand, sort of, just maybe even just looking at sort of the U.S. population, how many folks are Jewish? Just to kind of get an idea of sort of representation.
Just in the U.S. population?
Yeah.
I recently looked at a statistic. 2.4% of the population in the U.S. are Jewish.
Oh, okay. And again, I would have thought that number might have been higher. And so it's possible that, if there's representation, that maybe 2% of behavior analysts could be Jewish if it worked out that way. I mean, obviously we know with other backgrounds, the math doesn't match. We know with Black behavior analysts, it's something like 5%, and there's it's like 15 or 20% in the population. And so that doesn't work. I'm curious if you think, because anti-Semitism isn't a new thing, if you think there could be sort of Jewish behavior analysts out there that are afraid to be public with that or share that sort of info.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure there are. But, and that's another thing about having this organization too, is like,
Yeah.
wanting to make those clinicians who might fear being public about their Judaism, like not have to be that way.
Yeah.
you know, for a variety of reasons. One including, we obviously serve Jewish families as
Right.
clinicians, right? So, why not, go that extra mile of inclusivity and,
Hmm.
making sure that there's that awareness within our field of, Judaism. And I think another barrier is that there are a lot of people who either don't know or choose not to recognize Judaism as like a culture or like an
Right.
ethnicity. And so they only view it or think of it as a religion. And
Right.
so that is a barrier as well. So I think, spreading that awareness too, that it's not just that, it's a, ethno religion, as they say. And, many Jewish people, including myself, were raised very culturally Jewish. Like I'm not super religious.
Mm.
I don't know if I'm very religious at all, but
Mhm.
I was raised culturally Jewish and, want to maintain those cultures and traditions when I have children. I grew up going to synagogue, I was bat mitzvahed, went to Hebrew school, and I want that for my children too. But, I wouldn't say that we are, or that I or my family are super religious as far as, adhering to a lot of different religiously Jewish, traditions and things like that, like in my everyday life. So,
I think a lot of this is ignorance, right? And lack of knowledge and lots of myths and lots of confusion. All the things you've said for someone who's had a tad bit of experience with church, on the sort of Christianity side, not great experiences, mind you, but all that stuff sounds like what I'd call religion. And so why is that culture and not religion? And so how do you sort of differentiate that?
yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things, right? Like,
Mm.
of course, there's, the religious aspect of it. There's no getting around that it is a religion, but it's like a religion right? So, and then there's different, sects of Judaism. And so
Mm.
I was raised in a Reconstructionist synagogue, which is like a pretty, I feel like the best way that I feel to describe it is like pretty like laid back, lenient. The way I always say that I very much appreciate the way that like the Torah was taught to me was these are the stories of the Torah. These are the morals that are intended to be taught
Yep.
from these stories. We want you to take these morals. Now, if you literally believe that this happened, that's up to you. Like, we're not
Right.
telling you that this literally happened, but these are the morals that we think are important to know as a human being
Yeah.
and do with that what you will. Hopefully good things. Nothing was like shoved down my throat. Nothing was, and the environment was always very welcoming. My synagogue specifically I grew up going to was welcome to any and all people of any color, any religion, any creed.
Mm.
I went to Shabbat services every Friday night, but like growing up it wasn't like we're going to do this religious thing. It was on Friday night, we go here and we eat challah and we see people we know and friends. And I would bring my like friends from school all the
Right.
time. They would come with me. They weren't Jewish, but they
Right.
also had fun there because we got cookies and
Yeah.
stuff. And
And
we kind of
there
just like,
wasn't some underlying goal of conversion.
nope,
Yeah.
nope. And honestly, we were just being like little goofballs. Like when it was going on too long, we would like go run around the synagogue somewhere else until it was time to eat cookies. And
Yeah.
like everyone was fine with that. Nobody cared.
Yeah.
And so it was there was a lot of autonomy in the way that like I was brought up with Judaism. So the part of it where, I'm able to kind of disconnect that like religious aspect from it is the more like traditional and cultural aspects where, we celebrate Hanukkah because that's based on a story and history. A lot of the holidays are based on like historical events that we, remember, and we do symbolic things to remember these stories and these events, and I can appreciate that.
Mhm.
And so, and different just like generational traditions or generational like sayings and things, like I say oy vey at least like 20 times a day, and so that for me is where, you know I'm able to do all of those things. And for me, it's about belonging and togetherness and family and celebration and commemoration without there being an aspect or without there being the necessity of like praying or
Right.
God or
Yeah.
any of those aspects of
That
it.
makes sense. That makes sense. I'm curious, just kind of thought came to me if there's like if part of the, I don't know if confusion's the right word for folks, is the constant association with Christianity, even having sort of the Christian Bible, having this Old and New Testament and sort of, this perspective that New Testament is more Christian-y and Old Testament is more Jewish-y. And so therefore, since they're both in the same Christian book, then therefore it's all a religion and it's all sort of all on the same level. Do you think that's a lot of the reason for the confusion? Not to mention Hanukkah happen to happen in the same month as the Christian holidays, and it seems
Hmm.
like it seems like it from sort of behavior analytic sort of conditioning lens. There's a lot of parenting here kind of happening, and so we're starting to make these assumptions from one to the other.
Hmm. I think that comes from a lot of, first of all, misinformation. Second of all, just like lack of information, right? Like if you kind of just make those parallels based on like surface level, like these two holidays are in the same month,
Right.
like of course it's easy um to, reach for that comparison.
Yeah.
But if you look at what those holidays are celebrating, they couldn't be more different.
Hmm.
If you look at how they're celebrated, they couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
The only similarities are presents and the month,
Yeah.
but otherwise, and I don't know a ton about Christianity in general, but like you can even make the argument that like Christmas is a very what Christmas comes from as far as like the history of like that story in the Bible and things like that and what it is now for like children
Yeah.
who, Santa comes and brings you
Right.
gifts.
Yeah.
Like, it's very different. Whereas like for Hanukkah, you light the menorah to represent the 8 nights that oil lasted. So, but it's easy to make those comparisons when you have no information, I
That's what I'm
guess, or
saying.
just
Yeah.
like a bird's eye in like
Yeah.
view of information. I'm sorry, I forgot like your question because I
Well,
had
just
another
just
part
just
to
to
that
sort
answer.
of, it's really is a lot of the problem, just sort of this case of misinformation, because people are, you're confirming what I'm saying,
Hmm.
because I think people are sort of aligned when people don't have a lot of information, they just align what they know and make sort of sweeping generalizations. I mean, I grew up with sort of this, and I grew up not understanding Christianity or any other, the culture for point of speaking. But I grew up sort of this perspective that, again, Old New Testament thing, that, and I get that this is not correct, but basically the Jewish people were waiting for a Messiah, and the Christian people said they already came, and so that's done now. Bye bye. Jewish people can stop being Jewish now because the Messiah came and
Hmm.
Judaism is over.
Hmm.
He came, he left, it's good, we're done. And that's sort of based all of my biases and presumptions about Judaism and Christianity
Hmm.
for, the rest of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. It and it also it really speaks to, just the environment you're in and what you're learning from the adults around you as a child
Mhm.
too, because excuse me, like I said, I grew up Jewish, going to synagogue, learning about the Torah, and it wasn't until I was like 8 and we moved out of Chicago to like a suburb of Chicago, and I met my childhood best friend who was Catholic. And so something that I think is really cool is we grew up together. I went with her to church events and she went with me to synagogue events just because we wanted to do stuff together. But it wasn't because neither of our families were trying to impose religion on one another or like cultures on one another. It was just like we did things together and we learned together about different things. And so it wasn't until I was like 8 or 9 years old that I started learning that there were differences between, like Christianity and Judaism, because I had never talked about it before. I'd never heard about it before. There was no reason at that point before that I would know about any of those other things because I my family was Jewish and we talked about Jewish stuff.
And does being Jewish necessarily mean, because again, here's just another sort of random piece of information that may be accurate, may not be accurate. But I was thinking about sort of my dad did the 23andMe, DNA
I
test,
did too.
right? And so my dad's father is German, mom's born in Canada, and but he was adopted, and we don't know the story before him. We don't know who the biological dad was, and so
Mhm.
he grew up thinking he had sort of German and Scottish ancestry. Well, I got him this DNA test for Christmas a few years back, and he took it, and he found out that he was like 50% Jewish. And so now we're like, okay, there's a story here, grandpa's.
Especially if like his dad was German.
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
Grandpa's dad was probably, Jewish and was
Mhm.
probably hiding that fact, and probably was maybe potentially even, trying to save his son. So adopted him out to a different family, that maybe wasn't Jewish or something because of all the things that were kind
That
of going
makes me
on.
feel really emotional.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, because that's like how intricate. Like,
Right. And granted, and again, we don't need to sort of tangent so much into sort of the history there. My granddad, I never met him. He died before I was born, and maybe when I was born. But he was born sort of, I think, 1903 or something like that, like early.
mhm,
And I think he came to Canada probably in the 20s, maybe the 10s or 20s, and so kind of pre a lot of the history we're all familiar with.
mhm.
But it sounds like there were still problems there long before, Nazism and whatnot, or long before the man in the mustache and all that.
Yep. Yep.
And so, this is something I want to learn more about and dig into and kind of find out, because I've always been curious for my history. Because obviously I'm 25%, somewhere in there,
Mhm.
and so there's a thing there. I had a point here. Oh yeah, so I had a question, and that was sort of being that it's in my DNA.
Mhm.
Is it safe to say that probably yourself and most Jewish folks on sort of this side of the world are connected by blood, by DNA to sort of the Hebrew culture, kind of going back the thousands of years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that is a sentiment that's shared a lot now, with this conflict happening in the Middle East, and how, because of that, Jewish connection, not just, by culture, tradition, or religion, or however you want to look at it, but by literal DNA,
Mm,
that connection to Israel as like a homeland, right? Which is, where we get into that, what the actual definition of Zionism is, and not
mm,
what has been unfortunately shared across, the West and everywhere else as,
mm,
the definition that a lot of like people want to put a negative connotation on it and completely rearrange the definition, whereas its literal definition and concept is that, Jewish people have the right to self-determination of Israel as, a homeland. Not
mm,
that only Jewish and Israeli people, but them accept XYZ, anyone else can be there, but like that's what Israel is seen as.
got it.
And so people have put this concept of colonization and white supremacy and tacked that on with Zionism.
Mm,
And honestly, I would love to know where that came from. Like who did that? And then the, individuals who believe that as fact.
mm,
And we now see Zionism as, a bad word, or
right.
an insult to call someone, when it's not
Mm,
that at all, and it's not a negative thing, and it's not anything that excludes anybody. And so, back to your, kind of question and point, is like, that is something that like brings the Jewish community together,
mm,
is that, it's so deeply rooted in our ancestry, in our DNA. That only kind of proves the point even more, that it's not just a religion, an ethnicity. If my 23andMe says I'm like 51 point something percent Ashkenazi Jewish,
yeah. Same.
and
That's what dad
all
is.
the rest,
Yeah.
yeah, and all the rest is like parts from Africa, because
Mm.
my mom is black, so that's
Yeah.
where all the Africa comes from. My dad is white and Jewish, that's where all the Ashkenazi Jewish comes from. And my mom actually converted to Judaism, so by her own choice, might I say. I love sharing her story. So, she grew up Catholic,
Yeah.
and married my dad. Being married to my dad, she came with us to all Jewish events, Jewish holidays, celebrating all the Jewish holidays with his whole family. And she never felt out of place or excluded or left out, especially besides me, her daughter, of course, being the only person of color at any of these family gatherings. And she felt so accepted in our synagogue, never felt that like she was, standing out in a bad way.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so people always ask me like, oh, did she convert to Judaism to marry your dad? I'm like, no, she didn't convert to Judaism until I was 15 years old. And it was her decision, because she said, and for my mom, it's a little bit more religious, or I won't say religious, it's more spiritual.
Yeah.
She said she felt closer to God in synagogue than she did in church.
Right.
And I think she felt more included and accepted. And so she made that decision on her own to convert. And it was a really cool thing to see for me, because, I had already been bat mitzvahed and everything. I was in high school. I was too cool for school, but she was taking conversion classes then. And I got to go with her to a couple of them to, see how it is. It was very cool. I was very interested in it. And, her ceremony, like her conversion ceremony, was incredible. It was something so special for her. And like, I think back on it now, and I appreciated it then, but I was also too young to appreciate different aspects of it. And I think back on it now, and I just am even more proud of her than I was that day, because, nobody told her to. My dad didn't care at all what, he just wanted her along for the ride, because he loves her. And she was like, I want this for me. And she did it. And she is one proud Jew. I think she's always been a Jewish mom.
Right.
I remember I was in high school at this time, and, after a conversion, like on a Friday night, she was like, we need to go to Shabbat. I was like, no, I'm going to hang out with friends. She's like, you're being a bad Jew. I was like, listen, just because you're a new Jew, like I have done my time. I'm going to go hang out with my high school friends.
Funny.
See you later.
That's awesome. That is a cool story. I wanted to go back to something you said. I have a lot of questions so we're just going to be kind of all over the place. But
no worries.
About when I was telling you about my dad and sort of that connection, you said that made you emotional. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that World War II and the Holocaust and things like that are terrible, depressing,
sure.
awful, especially since it's brought up so much more now.
Yeah.
So when we learned about that, in not only in like history classes, of course, in school, but in Hebrew school.
Right.
We got to go to field trips to Holocaust museums. I think I was in like 5th grade, so I was 10 or 11 at the time when we started to really like dive into that in Hebrew school and learn about it more. And we went to a Holocaust museum, and I just remember like that was the first time I just felt such a deep sadness. But while I also felt like a deep sadness, it was also a deep connection, because it's realizing that those people are Jewish like me, and they were punished for it in the most brutal, cruel way.
Yeah.
And masses of people were, horribly abused and murdered in such a horrible and cruel way just for that.
Yeah.
And it's like it hit me, and I think my 10-year-old, 11-year-old brain and heart was unsure of how to like respond to that besides just tears. I mean, how else can anyone respond to that, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember after that, like wanting to know more and like reading books on it, and just it while it's so dark, it like I think it's necessary to obviously like know about, right? And so it's also very common to go to presentations or hear from Holocaust survivors and hear them speak, or like see documentaries on it, on things like that and stuff. So I think when you brought up that you learned that there's this Jewish ancestry and like the time period, and I think you even like verbalized it too, because that's exactly where my head went, is like there could be a story there, and like there might not be, but like thinking about during that time, like there's probably a large percentage of people who have a similar situation where, their children and grandchildren have no idea that there's any type of Jewish ancestry because their, great grandparents and, what have you were in situations where they had to keep that a secret to survive. And, the fact that we can find that in their DNA, in our DNA, and it made me emotional because how sad that you had to keep your life, like a big part of your life, or maybe not, a secret to survive. And, it puts me on this tangent too of, segregation and racism, being a person of color, you cannot keep that a secret. And so it's just insane that that's something that can cause someone to being Jewish or being of color are two things that can cause someone to cause harm to you. And so that's kind of where my mind went. And it was, it's like, how sad, but like, how interesting to learn that now. And again, whether that's the case or not, like I could just be creating, a story, a background story for your family.
Yeah.
But it's still intriguing nonetheless because, this is new information for you that you were able to find from a DNA test, not from looking at pictures, not from interviews, from a DNA test. So.
Well, especially because, and I appreciate you answering the question and sharing that. It's also because the family knew the story and kept it hidden from my dad. Like people knew the answer to this question. Living people that my dad knew, his Uncle Frank, and I think even his mom, maybe not his mom, but his Uncle Frank, which was I think also adopted, but also been adopted, or maybe not. Maybe who knows? Maybe he was the biological son of the adopted family. I have no idea because I'm missing all those details. Knew who my grandfather's parents were and chose not to share that with my dad, and so they're and just like you said, the timing is that's definitely something I want to kind of dig more into going on. I want to kind of get into a bit of, you touched a bit on sort of Zionism and kind of what you're telling me. I think what you're telling me is the idea that what the intended definition of the term was that, that you have a cultural homeland, which is Israel, and it's not a, Jews only cultural homeland. It's just, that's where things started and that's where things continue. And that's sort of the place you go back to. What are some kind of other sort of myths that are being kind of portrayed in the media right now? Because I think the other piece is there's also this, we talked about this a bit when we met kind of prior. Because it's such there's a war, like you said, there's a lot of, tragedy on both sides, and deaths and all these sorts of things. And there's a big political situation right now, and we're also in a time right now, it's 2025, where there's a lot of these populist kind of governments, and there actually is a lot of from a government political perspective, there are a lot of folks thinking from that sort of white supremacist, nationalist, us only kind of lens. And so that stuff's all still happening, I think, and I think even in this sort of current conflict, but the problem seems to be that they're equating that to being Jewish, whereas what this really is a political problem. And maybe the politicians are also adding to that misinformation as well by, sort of using that to their advantage in some way. And certainly the current American government is feeding into that as well. So I think it's probably safe to say that the political stuff and the cultural stuff are not equivalent. Right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. And so the second secret word is misconception.
Hey y'all, it's Quintara Tucker here, aka the Mystical Analyst on Instagram. Now let me ask you something. Are you stuck exploring different career paths in ABA? Do you need to update that resume or CV? Or have you ever dreamed of speaking at different ABA conferences but don't know where to begin? If the answer is yes, then my 4-week virtual multicultural mentorship program is for you. During the program, we'll dive into career growth, branding, public speaking, and more. And you guessed it, all through a culturally responsive lens. We meet once a week, starting August 4th, all the way through August 25th. And don't worry, if you cannot attend live, the sessions will be recorded. Spots are limited, so join us and start becoming the BCBA that you are meant to be. For more information or to sign up, Click the link in my Instagram bio or visit www.qbconsulting1.
What are some of these other kind of myths that are and misinformation that are kind of being spread that you're perceiving as hate?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you bring up a good point where there's like people are, making these false parallels between, not just like white supremacy and Zionism, but, painting, especially people like here in the West, right? So they're painting Israel or, Israelis, the people of Israel, their government, Jewish people who support Israel, lumping them in a group together and assuming or spreading, which is not true, that their views and opinions and the way they operate is similar to how they would like equate it to how maybe someone here who has very like far right views would operate as far as, societal issues and things like that. And it couldn't be further from the truth. And I think that might be something that drives me the most insane when I see it in the media, especially when it's said by people who have never been to the Middle East before, especially who have never been to Israel before, and especially as a biracial Jewish woman who has been to Israel. So the big thing that like kind of makes my blood boil is when I see people saying that or making accusations that, overall they'll be like, Israel's an apartheid state, which it's not. They will say that they're racist there. They don't like people of color. They don't like Black people. They don't like Arabs. They don't like gay people, which is the furthest from the truth. And Israel in the media has time and time again shown that that's not the truth, but people would rather spin the negative connotation. And not even just that, like, oh, that's not true. I've been there. And before any of this had ever happened, one of the things that I noticed frequently from every place we went to were buildings and establishments had Black Lives Matter flags hanging up. So, when this was a larger, I'm going to kind of go back a little bit. When, like, during like COVID and when, the Black Lives Matter movement, not the organization, but the movement was very, prevalent, any like Jewish based organization, social media, whatever, did nothing but show solidarity with the Black community. I went home to visit in Illinois, and every synagogue I drove through or past had Black Lives Matter signs of inclusivity, all of it. So, and then in Israel, there's people of color everywhere, like that are from there or have moved there and live there and go there.
Yeah.
And the environment is the same as walking around in the melting pot that is America. Nobody is like, people are minding their own business and doing their thing and welcoming everyone. There's no apartheid. There's no, every place has their issues, but it's not a common concern of Israel. So that's one, that they don't approve of, homosexuality. Again, not true. When I went to Israel, we went out to all the bars, and they have gay bars. And, they're very accepting. There's drag queens, there's, all of the above. And nobody is like pointing and, laughing and threatening or anything. It is very accepted.
Right.
Tel Aviv has one of the biggest pride celebrations in the world. Very accepting. I saw people of every color everywhere, and it was not an issue. I don't know, this false equivalence, or it's not even an equivalence, this, made up idea based on propaganda of what Israel is what makes me the most upset, because people are taking that, and it's not true about Israel to begin with, and then they're placing it on Jewish people in general. And it's just so far-fetched, especially when you hear there's a Black Jewish community too. And so when you hear from the Black Jewish community of like, hey, that's not true, it is completely false, and here's my lived experience, and it's ignored. So that's, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions that is out there, and I don't understand it.
So what are I guess then what about sort of in the field? And so it's the Jewish Association for Behavior Analyst Analysis. What are your kind of concerns about what's happening in our field as it relates to this?
So, I think, as is in the field in general, as stated, in many concepts in Cooper and our ethics, it's important to, when we're implementing our science, we're analytical, we're objective, we're scientific. So, obviously there's an aspect, those soft skills of communicating with a variety of, types of people and families. And that's where we also see the cultural competence and, DEI. And there's nothing within the science, though, of our field that allows room ethically to make any decisions on, implementing our science of ABA based on your own personal opinion of someone based on either your beliefs or their beliefs. It's where, if that's if that's how you're programming or implementing your clinical abilities, like, you have to take a step back because you're no longer objective. That's very subjective, and it's putting your client at risk, and they're not receiving the best care because you are making clinical judgments based on personal beliefs. And so what we have seen in our field is, I don't know the statistic or how many clinicians specifically, but it's just, we've seen it on TikTok, social media, whatever. There are clinicians out there who are using their credential as a BCBA to discuss or share this belief that, as a behavior analyst, you should share this belief with us because this is the moral correct belief. And when they're sharing those beliefs, it's very negative, very anti-Israel. And I think that everyone is entitled to their own beliefs. I will, that is not something that I'm saying that they should not think that way. However, when you are bringing it in to our field and making claims, whether it's like a trendy video or a trendy way to, share that message, at the end of the day, the message that's being conveyed is, I'm a behavior analyst. I do things ethically based on our ethical code. And because I'm a very ethical person, I am anti, Israel and other various anti-Semitic comments. And there's like a sense of pride in sharing that, as if like that's, how one should think. And that's very subjective, right? Especially when there's not a lot of education or information on the situation in general. And not only that, but it has nothing to do with our field. It has absolutely nothing to do, like, your personal beliefs have nothing to do with you being a behavior analyst. So what is the connection there? So something that we discuss within our organization is, how do we ethically, Jewish behavior analysts, professionally and ethically correct this in our field so that we can bring it back to, let's focus on our science. Let's focus on the services we're providing for our families and the community, and not letting our own personal beliefs like cloud our judgment as clinicians, because that's not fair and that's not relevant. And another big issue that we have seen in the field is that, obviously, we all know as behavior analysts, it's important to, accumulate your continuing education units, or CEUs. And we've seen CEUs offered that don't fit the criteria of what an ethical CEU should have. It being counted as a CEU when there's very subjective opinions having to do with the conflict. But, this obviously was very discouraging for us in this field. And it's as if it's as if there's like some sort of allowance of um uh directed disdain for people who don't think the same way as you do, and
Right.
and equating it to our science and our field that is supposed to be objective. And furthermore, a lot of those events specifically have kicked people out for questioning anything discussed in those events,
Mm.
or turned off the chats, or have been gaslit, for lack of a better phrase, in those events for questioning, hey, you mentioned this, but here's, a fact of XYZ, and being, completely shut down and kicked out of the event for asking the question because it doesn't align with the beliefs of the presentation. So, as a group, we were able to go through the ethics code and go through what was in violation of those types of CEUs and events, and, bring it to, uh, the powers that be, if you will, without naming, specific organizations, and share with them like, hey, we're not here to police other people for their beliefs, and but this was very targeted, this was very negative, this was very hateful, and it was presented as a continuing education unit for behavior analysts, and this is not ethical. And we were heard. Then there was like further action taken. So that's where it's starting to seep into our field.
Yeah, that's a tough road. Another area I think that gets confusing for people is just the whole concept of anti-Semitism and what it actually means to be anti-Semitic. I think, COVID and Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd murder really opened up the doors for people to understand racism and anti-Black racism in particular, and kind of hate speech as it related to sort of, Black folks, and really, and Asian folks, again, with COVID, big time, Indigenous folks, with sort of the following year with the uncovering of all the child graves at the residential schools. And I think, at least for me, I can conceptualize those things, and I can self-reflect and try not to think that way, and notice biases that I have towards sort of those groups and go, that's sketchy, that's bad, that's wrong. And I can also start to call folks out now. I can tell when sort of anti-Black racism and anti-Asian racism and anti-Indigenous racism is happening. I can see it, and I've learned a lot more about microaggressions and what those look like in these sort of different groups. But I think folks really struggle to recognize any of those things in the Jewish community and to recognize what anti-Semitism is. And I think often folks, myself included, and we talked a bit about this when we met before, are afraid to say anything at all because they're afraid that they're going to be accused of being anti-Semitic because they just don't know what they're doing. It's pure ignorance. They don't realize at all what's kind of happening. What do we do there?
Yeah, I think, a good place to start is that, and something I see a lot is that we're seeing that non-Jewish people are sharing what they think the definition of either of what they think anti-Semitism is or what they think it should be. And that's not appropriate. Instead of listening to Jewish people share what it is. I personally don't think it's a very difficult concept to understand, but I also, as far as minorities go, I've got it all. So I don't know that.
Right.
Obviously
Yeah.
It's not difficult for me to understand.
Yeah.
I think it also comes from very radical individuals who are saying that it's the people who are like, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist, and those aren't related, and it's based on misinformation.
Of course, they don't, because they don't know what that means.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then there are the people who, I'm not anti-Semitic, I just don't agree with the Israeli government. It's like, well, great, that's fine, you're entitled to that, but your actions and what you're saying to Jewish people here in America shows shows otherwise. Because you can criticize the Israeli government. Most Israelis do, the same way most Americans criticize the American government.
Right.
You know, you're allowed to disagree with
Right.
policies, laws, etc., as made by your government. Most people hate the government, right?
Yeah.
And we live in a country where that's okay. You will not, you know, be punished or murdered
You're
or
not
anything for hating our
anti-American.
government.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're not
Yeah.
anti-American. And that's something that I've, you know, said to someone before, especially someone who's does not agree with anything with our current president, which is fine. But I wouldn't say that they're not American. They still enjoy living here in America and being here. And it doesn't, if I was an outsider and someone said that they do agree with what our, you know, president does and says, like, I wouldn't then group the entire country and everyone in that country with being someone who's an aggressor or someone who is, you know, harming people, hurting people, agrees with the war. Because again, nobody wants this war. But anyway, back to specifically anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that are saying, well, if I say anything bad about the Israeli government, I'm going to be called anti-Semitic. And it's like, nobody is doing that. You're being called anti-Semitic because you are targeting Jewish people here in America who are born in America and just happen to be Jewish, and yelling at them and aggressing towards them and blocking them from going to their classes on school campuses and, you know, all of these things, when what do they have to do with the Israeli government? They live in America. They are Jewish Americans. So the fact that you targeted them was clearly solely because they are Jewish. And so for some reason, there's like a disconnect there. You know, an example is I did share earlier when I start, like, one of my fears in sharing my organization was receiving negativity. And while I am grateful that I have not received any negativity or, you know, hate or harassment, I have received one public, you know, comment on a LinkedIn post about my organization from a BCBA in our field. And so the organization is Jewish Organization for Behavior Analysis, not Israeli Organization for Behavior Analysis. So it's just a bunch of people, just a bunch of Jews who like ABA who get together, you know? So and again, it's not exclusive to Jews. If you want to learn more about Judaism and how, you know, we can spread awareness within our field, please come join. Like everyone is welcome, every color, person, religion, whatever. So I posted in, like, sharing about the organization. I posted on LinkedIn, you know, this group, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember exactly what I said. Check out our Facebook group. And so didn't mention anything about the conflict, didn't mention anything about Israel specifically, just here's my group. And a BCBA, I don't know her personally, but she listed herself as a BCBA, commented and said, and I remember this, she said, I have family members that are being murdered in Palestine. Can I join? And I had said, I didn't say anything. I didn't respond. I withheld attention from that behavior because I didn't want to reinforce it. But, you know, my first thought immediately was, you brought this up because you saw the word Jewish. And that's where, you know, we're seeing anti-Semitism, but other people are not making that connection.
Right.
You brought up, you know, something terrible that's happening due to a conflict in the Middle East, but you brought it up because you saw the word Jewish. So
There it is.
that's a lot of what I see on social media and just in the media in general. You know, someone who just is Jewish posts something and immediately attacked for things that are happening in the Middle East. Someone who says anything about Judaism or a Jewish holiday immediately met with comments having to do, and it's like, you do realize that, like, what you're saying is not relevant to this, but you are making it relevant because you saw Jewish.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. Yeah.
You would think.
Yeah. So what are, so you've got a few more members now. I was going to ask this question earlier, but knowing that you only have 90 folks in your Facebook group, because I was noticing you're sort of saying happy birthday to individual people. I was like, is there that few of you that you can say happy birthday to them all?
Well, that is just a thing. I just personally love birthdays. I love
Right.
celebrating other
Gotcha.
people like on their day. I love making that day about them.
Right.
And so earlier on in the group, I was like, comment with your birthday because
Gotcha.
at that point there were so few people in the
Yeah.
group. And I just at that point too, I had already like talked with some of the people, met with some of the people, and was just so incredibly grateful for how they received this group and how they want to be a part of it and how they share my vision and wanting this to be something and are like they put in the effort, which they don't have to. Like they're all BCBAs, so I know they're super busy, and they make the time to um, come to meetings. They make the time for discussions. They make the time to,
Nice.
communicate with
They're involved.
the
Yeah.
board and things like that about all the like to be involved. And I want to like be able to, shout them out. And for our very active members, I've been able to like send them a little like gift of like this Stanley with like the
Oh yeah.
logo
Cool.
on it and stuff. And they've been super grateful. But again, that like you were saying, that was when there were less people in the group and now there's
Yeah. Yeah.
more. And so I don't know that I can send everyone a Stanley
Yeah.
cup, but
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
can at least like, make them feel like they're heard and seen, not just in like the chaos of everything that's happening, but even just in our group, because I know how important that is to me. I would like to do that.
Before you started the group, because I've had conversations with folks from sort of a few different of these. I think one term folks use is affinity group, when you kind of bring together sort of a group from a different a culture or a commonality. Sometimes they call them affinity groups. I've seen that sort of in psych research or whatever. Before you started the group, did you kind of have that feeling of and again, I know you're kind of dealing with this on a couple levels, because I know a lot of my Black guests have said they felt like the only one. But were you? I guess number one, have you felt kind of sort of other than like the only one, as a Jewish behavior analyst? And two, what was it like when you started connecting with more in the group?
Have felt like other, but not because of like being Jewish. So
Yeah.
I don't really have, I I've definitely been excluded, felt left out, this, that, and the other for being half Black, but
Right.
never
Yeah.
for being Jewish, which, not that I'm glad I've had those other negative experiences, but,
Of course. Yeah.
I'm happy to say that I haven't had any, negative experiences for being Jewish. But I have felt that way for like other reasons, just as like a clinician in general. And I know how awful it feels to, especially when like someone who's working so hard to be a good clinician
Yeah.
and working so hard to be successful as a clinician and to provide for their families, like the families they work with, and to feel like that work goes unnoticed like in any organization or company, right? And so I think because that's important to me, I understand that like aside from us all being Jewish in this group, right? We're all behavior analysts, we're all
Yeah. Yeah.
BCBAs, and not that we need pats on the back and to be recognized, but like we work really hard. Like clinicians in this field, not just BCBAs, RBTs work really hard in this field, and we're all burnt out at some point. And
Yeah.
it's very easy to feel like nobody cares or that
Mm.
we're not seen or that we're not heard for any reason too. So like just to like, hey, today is this person's birthday and I want to single them out today.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
look at them. Like if I can just do that, because obviously the members of this group are all over the country.
Yeah.
We've met virtually. I have not had the opportunity to meet any of them in person. So I can't be like, let's go have lunch and celebrate you. So
Sure.
if I can just,
This is the way to do it. Yeah.
yeah.
What has been sort of the response? So when you open the group up, and especially sort of post October 7, and folks kind of started loading in, what were maybe just without sort of giving anyone away, kind of some of the comments and discussion when for the first time some of these folks were able to connect with other folks that shared this commonality.
I was actually just talking to my fiance about this yesterday. After every meeting, he always asks like, "How did the meeting go?" And I'm just so full of, being so grateful and glad I took the sleep, because the people that are part of this group at every meeting, they come like ready to discuss things that they're passionate about in the field specifically. It's never just like we're not just sitting there talking about like, woe is us, we're Jewish and
Mm.
targeted and blah, blah, whatever. It's all very, and there's like there's so many intelligent clinicians in this group who have their PhDs, who are like, some who are like well known and provide CEUs and have like their own companies and organizations and are ACE providers and things. And so it's not just like, I'm glad we were able to connect because we have this thing in common that we're both Jewish, but like I'm such an ABA nerd. So, I'm like starstruck sometimes that, I get to interact and network with these individuals who I am so excited to get to learn from. And, not just talk to them about Judaism within our field, but like just things about our field in general. Like they're another group of resources, because I work for a company where all of the BCBAs and things like that are very collaborative. And so it's just this other source of collaboration that I have from these like very experienced doctorate level clinicians, or just not even doctorate level, just like they've been a BCBA for such a long time and have so much experience in the field. And so to be able to connect with them about ABA, and also, this common factor that we all are very passionate about. Every single time I interact with any of them, they all they show so much gratitude for the organization. They're like, thank you so much for starting this. We're so grateful that, we've built this community, because we really have. And, it's also a community where, we have a WhatsApp group and people just kind of like vent about maybe something that happened at work, at their job as a clinician, or maybe something they saw in social media on Judaism and things like that. And it's become just a very supportive group. And everyone is so kind and so nice. I made a joke. We were on Zoom for our meeting and I was like, I just have the free account, so it's only 40 minutes. And someone said, well, I have a business account, so I can help you set that up. And I said, thank you so much. Don't worry, I'll get my own account so I don't have to mooch off of you guys. They all like interrupted me. They're like, excuse me, no, it is never mooching. Like, you do so much. Like, we'll help, we'll provide. Da, da, da. This is a group effort. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that overall, I'm just glad that these people, like, it seems like they share my vision and passion for making an impact, a positive impact in this field. And I'm just grateful that we all came to the same place. And
That's awesome.
Because I had the courage to start this Facebook group.
So what are some kind of the next steps for, is there a short form? It'd be Jabba. No, that's Joba. Yes. So what are some of the next steps for Joba?
Yes, actually, we just talked about that yesterday. So I'm, working on having it registered as a nonprofit organization.
Nice.
And so with that, sorry, I'm just pulling up my presentation I shared yesterday.
Cool.
Different, events that we're attending or offering, or like that are in the works, and then developing our mission statement, developing our core values, and then also organizational roles. So, having that like a board of directors, having, different additional roles. Something that I thought would be, because we were talking about the CEUs, I thought it would be, beneficial to have someone in the role of, ethics advisor, someone in the role of like a research specialist.
Cool.
Yeah, especially because we do, like I said, there's a lot of doctorate level BCBAs in the organization who have the tools and resources to conduct a lot of research and want to share. In fact, there's a member of the group who did her dissertation. I don't know exactly the topic, but I want her to talk about it more at our next meeting. But her dissertation was on services provided to students with special needs in Jewish schools.
Yeah.
And I want to know more about her research and, her findings and things like that. So there's a lot of other like research she said she wants to do. So I'm like, ooh, you'd be perfect for that role. So I had, the idea for that role.
Yeah.
So yeah. And, just kind of gathering all the things that, are necessary for a registered nonprofit organization. And, everyone in the group is so motivating. And I want to, they see the potential of this, and I don't want to like let them down. I really want to make this, what they see that it can be and what I see that it can be, and just, again, overall work towards, improvement in our field.
Fantastic. Wow. Cool. Marissa, this is cool. It was good to get to know you and learn a little bit about Judaism and learn about all the cool things that are happening at Joba. And it's awesome having you on the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I love getting to chat about it all and answering your questions. And learning more about you too.
The third secret word is experience. After listening to this conversation, here are 3 other episodes of the Behavior Speak podcast that might be worth digging into. Episode 136, From Bias to Balance, Anti-Racism and Behavior Analysis with Dr. Sonia Levy. Episode 115, Microaggressions, a Primer with Dr. Bree Banks. And episode 67, Humility, Compassion, and Reflection with Dr. Nasia Cerencioni-Olizi and Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and subscribe to our YouTube page at Behavior Speak. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.